Hello, 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 hello. All right. Hello, hello, hello out there in YouTube land. Welcome to her real review and my discussion about The Walking Dead. So, for those of you who are visiting the channel for the first time or new to the channel, hi, my name is Quanna, and I am a Walking Dead super fan. I have been watching the show since day one. But because I started my channel so far after the show had been airing and after the major slump of season 8 and everything like that, I just never got around to talking about the show on this channel. But because this has been such a part of my life for the last 11 years, I thought, why not go out with a bang, do a discussion, find out what other fans are thinking about the show. So, if you are joining me for the very first time, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you stick around and join the comments and talk a little bit about the show with me. And if you stumble across this video after we've gone live, please feel free to jump in the comments and talk about it. I started this channel about 3 years ago, and so we were post season 8 or kind of like midway in season 8 whenever I started this channel. And The Walking Dead has always been one of those shows that I have been like super, super, super supportive of, but I just couldn't figure out how to start that far into the show with talking about the show. It was kind of overwhelming. And then I would have slumps where I wouldn't really record much and things like that. And then the pandemic happened. So I never got on board with covering the show. That being said, I've also never stopped watching the show. So even though my husband fell off of watching the show with me, I still stayed on. There were some years where I did not have access to watching it live in real time, and I had to catch up when the season was over, and I could afford to like do like a 1 week trial and kind of binge everything. But for the most part, I've watched everything in real time. So my first question of the night is just hopefully what did everyone think of this season, the series? I want to say season finale. Also, I'm going to try to limit the coughing in this video, but for those of you who are not new to my channel, know I am getting over a bout of COVID. Yes, it got me 2.5 years after the fact. I managed to escape it for so long, but it did get me, and so I'm still dealing with some like residual congestion. So I got my ginger ale bold. Might have needed something a bit stronger for everything that has happened with this show and all of the ups and downs and things like that. So, general question for the night is just what did everyone think of the series finale? And we'll post and pin post and pin that to the top of the chat. What did everyone think? Oh, I don't know. Oh, you know what? I don't know that I don't have anything set up for donations, but I appreciate you wanting to donate so much. I really do. Um but yeah, you know what? This show has been such a kind of roller coaster of emotions, and we're going to get into some of the biggest moments of the show. But I will say this: hopefully, you've had a chance to watch the finale. I thought the finale wasn't bad. I have a couple of shows that I would say are foundational shows for me that I stuck with from beginning to end, and when I got to the end, this definitely was not a bad finale. There were some things pacing wise that could have been a bit better. Really, just everything with the Commonwealth for such a big community happened very fast in comparison to some of the communities that were smaller. Um, thank you. um, but yeah, there were I think a lot of things that were really rushed about everything with the Commonwealth. That being said, I do appreciate the fact that it felt like most of like the major plot lines kind of came to some type of conclusion. And there were some things I wish that they would have spoken to, but it definitely wasn't a bad finale. I think it hit the main things. It did feel like a goodbye. And I think that's always the biggest thing with any kind of series finale is you want it to feel like it's a goodbye. You want to feel like even if the characters are existing in perpetuity and they're off into the world and things are okay, that there's not necessarily going to be a whole lot left that would have covered. And so in that regard, it felt like they're in a space, they're going to run it better than Pam. They've learned more lessons than she has, and they have a better idealistic vision for the future. And so perhaps, this will be a utopian society amidst all of the craziness. That being said, I have thoughts about the spinoffs that they're launching, the Rick and Michonne spinoff, Negan and Maggie spinoff called Dead City, and then Daryl Dixon spinoff, which I think is just titled Daryl Dixon as of right now. And I kind of hope that they give it a better name than that. But I thought that as a finale goes, I would definitely give it a 8.5 to a 9 leaning, like high B plus to low A, just because I do feel like it hit everything it needed to hit. But I wanted to talk, I guess I'm going to recap about what happened in this finale. And I wanted to start with like just a retrospective and find out who was your saddest death? Whose death do you feel like you took it the hardest? And let me know in the comments whose death you took the hardest. That's like my first big secondary question of the night. And my big, saddest death is definitely the combo death of Glenn and Abraham, but particularly Glenn. Glenn was the soul of the show, the heartbeat of the show for so long. And so to lose him, even though from the comics I knew it was coming, Stephen Yeun is just a delightful actor. He lights up the screen. He's charismatic. And I think in almost everything I've ever seen him in, I was sad to see his character go. Maybe on another light, I'm going to talk about Nope and whether that rings true for Nope. But yeah, Glenn and Abraham, I think Abraham's death was sad, but he went out core to who he was and as a G, and he went out strong. Glenn, unfortunately, was not able to go out strong. And so his was really, really sad for me. After Glenn and Abraham, I would say that the saddest death for me was Carl. And we can get into this if people have. I have lots and lots of thoughts about Carl's death out of and exit out of the show. I do not agree with the showrunners. Merle, Merle's death was a sad death. He had, I think, the better redemption arc. I think what they were hoping to give us with Negan, we got that with Merle. And no other character on the show needed or has had a redemption like Merle. So definitely, that was a hard death. It does make my top 5 list of hard deaths. Carl was just, he was, other than Glenn, he was Rick's motivation. And the idea that Rick exists, yes, he has Judith, but let's be honest, that ain't his baby. And that doesn't mean anything. You can be adopted, you can be raised by someone that your parent, but Carl was Rick's purpose. He was his reason for living. He was the whole reason why he woke up out of that coma. And so to kill Carl as the only way in which Negan can have a redemption, when that at the end of it all, did we get the payoff for that? And yeah, we're going to have this spinoff, but do we really need Negan? Do we really need Negan? Do we really need him as that redemption? No, I don't think we do. So I just feel like that was a really bad death. There were other things that I think that they could have done in order to give Negan that redemption pathway, bring him into the fold without killing Carl. And I much would have rather have seen them do something with Carl's character where Carl's character was somehow taken or somehow lost. And because Negan had at that point developed some type of relationship with Carl, where he was kind of looking at Carl as like a surrogate, where in Negan's mind, at the bare minimum, Negan's motivation for killing Glenn and Abraham and everything that he did was, you all broke my rules. I gave you warnings. This is your punishment. And Negan fully believed that. And so I can definitely envision a world in which perhaps Negan doesn't immediately jeopardize himself for Carl, but the bare minimum, if Carl was taken from him, like Carl was there with Negan and the survivors, and he felt some type of like responsibility to Carl, and someone else came along and took Carl, and Negan would definitely be like a how dare you kind of situation. Rick, let's sally at the horses, let's go out and ride. I just think they could have done something different. Who was your all-time favorite character? So my list of my all-time favorite characters of the show, it is probably a tie for Michonne and Glenn, although I hated what they did with Michonne in season 9 and 10. But Glenn, Michonne had the best entries into the show, hands down. Glenn on that radio saying to Rick, and excuse my French, hey jackass. That was such a great entrance into the show. And then to get the reveal of him. And then, of course, Michonne, iconic with her two walkers in the background. Rick, of course, you can't help but to love Rick, but let's be honest, Rick's character did fall apart towards the end. And I think Rick kept learning the same lesson again and again and again. And I think that was part of why it fell flat towards the end, because some of the lessons he was still trying to learn, he'd already really firmly learned them in seasons 2, seasons 3, seasons 4. That is like, why do we have to go through this, him needing to learn this lesson again? He's already learned this lesson. He didn't need to learn a lesson about forgiving people because he'd already done that so many times before and letting people in, that they really just needed a different motivation for Regan to exist, for Nick and Rick to exist, Negan and Rick to exist. And then of course Carol. Carol is someone who, she was weak and she came in and she's saved the day. Look at Herschel. Look at you bringing in Herschel. Herschel had a shocking death, definitely. But he was, definitely, I think there's tons of callbacks, and especially for last night's episode, with characters whose death was like a sacrifice or a lesson that needed to be learned, or a sacrifice for the gang to be able to exist. And Herschel was one of those moments. Definitely miss Herschel, R.I.P. and everything. So let's talk about the series finale. Series finale was really interesting, had some really good moments for as fast as it went. And we're not even going to mention the commercials. Oh my word. I swear, the commercials were first and foremost fantastic, right? Using the zombies. I feel like maybe I'm blanking, but I feel like they did that in a previous season, but it was really nice. We got a commercial with Andrea. We got a commercial with Gareth. We got a commercial with someone else that I missed the commercial because I went to go make something to eat when it was on. But we got some really great zombie appearing commercials. But there were so many good callbacks in the series finale that I think, despite some of my gripes with it, very minimal gripes with it, it went really, really well, especially starting at the very beginning with Daryl and Judith at the hospital in the Commonwealth, him trying to save Judith, putting her on that stretcher. Call back to season 1, episode 1 with Rick and Shane, with Shane before he became a villain, saving Rick by putting that gurney in front of the door and protecting him from the zombies. Great callback in that moment. And then from there, the Commonwealth is just flooded with walkers, and we get outside of the hospital trying to get inside. We've got our core gang. We've got Carol. We've got Luke and Yumiko and Connie and Kelly and just the whole team. And poor Jules gets taken out by those flood of walkers. And in trying to rescue her, our boy Luke gets bitten. And despite them managing to cut off his limb, he succumbs to his injuries and dies. Luke brought music, he brought soul to the show. RIP to Jules and to Luke. And if this was right now, if I was on the Talking Dead, this was where we would have our in memoriam moment. I'm about to say memorandum, in memoriam moment. The sad thing about the Jules and Luke death is just that they hadn't done much with those characters in so long that it was a great kill shot visually for seeing Judith get like completely just torn apart. It was giving callbacks. For me, it was giving callbacks to some of the more gruesome deaths, particularly Noah's death way back in season 5, I think. It was giving me callbacks to that. Luke has been a beloved character. I've loved Luke since we first met him. He was the leader of his group. And it was nice to have that moment where his group could kind of come together and bond over the loss of him and have that moment. But it did feel flat because they haven't done much with Luke in so long that I almost forgot about Luke, to be honest with you. And there are technical reasons why they couldn't have killed off Kelly or Connie, especially as it pertains to maybe anything might happen with Connie in the future, with Connie and Daryl. We don't know. Having Kelly there to be able to translate and do ASL for Connie, so they can't kill one of those off. I kind of would have not minded Yumiko dying in that moment because they have done some things with her character, even though the payoff wouldn't have been it. I don't know. I just felt like the Luke death fell flat. And then we shoot over to Eugene, Gabriel, and Rosita, who are, of course, searching for baby Coco. And they finally make it into the nursery where they have baby Coco, and there's another baby in there, and there's walkers in there. And thankfully, the crib is turned over, and Rosita just barely manages to rescue baby Coco. This was definitely the most suspenseful sequence of the night, where we're getting them rescuing baby Coco, them having to get out with the babies, them getting stuck in a ambulance, and then finally they get out and they find a drainage pipe to climb up to safety. Gabriel goes up first, Eugene goes up, Gabriel goes up, and then Rosita goes up and is not able to latch on and falls into a sea of walkers. And I very audibly cried out in shock at that moment. Was not expecting that, because when she's got a whole baby strapped to her chest, right? I felt like this was a callback to the fake out dumpster death of Glenn in season 7. I don't know about you guys if it was giving you fake out Glenn moment, but that's what it was giving me. But then Rosita, in full bad B mode, jumps up, is not bitten by the walkers, at least that we know of at that moment, and starts slashing and hacking walkers left and right. Very cool moment visually, very cool sequence. I did hear some rumors that you can see some CGI error in that moment, but in the moment, it was a completely amazing moment. But it did give me dumpster fake out. And then she manages to climb up that drain pipe and get to safety with baby Coco. And all it seems well with the world until later on, when we find that she was bitten by a walker in that moment. And of course, it's giving you Carl's death, where we don't know that's what's happened, and then we find out and it's revealed. We get the Commonwealth kind of overrun by the zombies, and I think at one point we find out that Mercer of course is locked up, but he's been rescued by his sister and Princess. I really love Princess and Mercer together. I think they are super cute. Princess is just such a light and a lovable character. I'm glad that they didn't kill her. I think she brings that comedic relief that you need in the show. So you definitely don't want to kill off that person, because no one else kind of has that comedic timing in the same way, and that lightness about them. Eugene sometimes has comedic moments, but he is so heavy. and always so sad faced, that I think that you need a princess. But I definitely think that other we're going to talk about the deaths that happen in this show, in this particular episode. They managed to meet up with, you've got um, everyone's eventually kind of like rescued and meets up, rendezvous with like Ezekiel. And there's some moments there that like the timing and how people get out and everything like that don't really make sense, but they manage to get out and they come up with a plan to basically bomb the crap out of the estate area, use music to draw the walkers all to one general vicinity, and then bomb the crap out of them and kill them. To me, there were tons of callbacks in this moment to Rosita and the bridge plan, where they took out that road of highway. They got the walkers all to come through, and they took out the bridge, um, or the overpass. It reminded me of that sequence, but also just the use of fire in general reminded me of like the fires at Hilltop in Alexandria, to Carol bombing Terminus, and it works. The use of the rock song in that moment to draw the zombies, smart, but it was also giving me kind of like Stranger Things vibes in that moment of like using like a heavy metal rock song in that way. So let me know in the comments if you were getting like Stranger Things vibes there. Eventually, they make it to Alexandria. Now, this is where I do think that the show was a little bit like, okay, wanting to preserve Alexandria, assuming that Pamela was going to preserve Alexandria and use it like as an outpost. Okay, whatever. But taking everyone out of the Commonwealth after that big bombing and into Alexandria, it felt a little weird and just like hastily done. But to see like all those people, them confront and finally have the final confrontation with Pamela, deciding not to kill her, but to talk to her that and tell her that, like, have that those big speech moments between Gabriel, between Daryl, between Ezekiel, where they're giving these big speeches about the people are the reason for all of this. And if we're not going to save the people and we're not going to be there for the people, what was the point? What were the point of all these lives that we've lost for Pamela, her son, and her son and Lance being sacrificed? Like, what's the point of all that if we're not going to save the people? And those moments were very necessary. I would not take anything away from those moments, except for the fact that maybe I wouldn't have had Daryl uttered like the line from the comic, just because by the time he had already said everything he said, it was like point made, and then that kind of became overkill and awkward a little bit, just a teach. When he said we aren't the Walking Dead, it was enough to me that he said that out there are the enemies, like the walkers, those are the enemies, and in here we're humans, we're there for each other. But ultimately, right, we get to see Gabriel let the people in. Great callback to the fact that when the zombie apocalypse happens, he locks people out of his church, and he feels a great amount of guilt for years about that. And so him letting people in when he's at risk, when the walkers are right behind them, great callback, full circle arc for him. Having Ezekiel giving those speeches, reminding us that he's the king. We haven't heard him called King Ezekiel in a while, but I'm calling him King Ezekiel today because he was the king. And then, of course, Daryl having that moment again, reminding us that he was a guy who reminded me of the Goonies. Well, Goonies never say die. But no, with Daryl, we've had so many moments reminding us that Daryl was this loner. Daryl was off to his own. All he needed was his brother. And then when his brother died, he didn't really need anybody. And then he makes a family in Rick and in Glenn and in all the guys. And then slowly his family gets picked away, but he never loses the core of who he is. And then even when Rick is dead and gone and he loses his way for a while, he comes back. Why? For Judith. I'm going to talk about that in a second because of what happens at the end of the show. But having him give those big speeches, reminding us that he's kind of taking over for Rick in those moments. Again, nice touches. I just think for the pacing, it did not work. just because of how much they had to move from the Commonwealth to Alexandria, and those places were not super close in proximity. So the idea that they made it back to one after the other, it just felt weird. Or I guess maybe they were in the Commonwealth. It just seemed kind of wonky. We get to the end. Before all of that, Maggie and Negan have the talk that they have been needing to have about what he did to Glenn, the fact that Maggie will never really 100% be able to forgive him because that was the love of her life. And he was such a beautiful soul. He did not deserve it. But the fact that she sees Negan is trying to be a better person, and that's basically what this life is all about. And so she's going to allow him to stay there and be safe with his wife and his unborn child. That was the moment we needed to have, right? We needed to have that moment. That moment doesn't get me to understanding why we have a Negan and Maggie show, but it was a really nice moment to have. Finally, that restitution there. And I think that mimics, for those of us who are super Glenn fans, it mimics how we feel about Negan, which is, yo, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, you cool, bro. We like you. We like you for you in real life, but you killed our boy Glenn, and we're not going to ever really let you forget that. And so this whole idea of a redemption arc feels a little crazy. That's kind of the vibe that Maggie was giving me with that talk, but it was a great moment. Some of the best writing that the show has had in a while. And so for all of the pacing flaws of this episode, Negan should die. I don't disagree. Because I kind of feel like that's why Merle, to your point, Ian, that's why Merle had the better redemption arc, right? Because even though he redeemed himself, he did it. He made the ultimate price to save his brother. And who has Negan? How has Negan paid a price? Because let's be honest, Negan still survived. His wife is still living that we know of. She still gonna have a baby that we know of. Since his bad deeds, who has he genuinely lost and sacrificed? What does he sacrifice to earn this redemption? Not much of anything personally, not like in the same level as other characters. So that is why he has the worst redemption arc. And I will agree with you that he should still die. I'm not 100% on board for a Maggie and a Negan spinoff. Likewise, can I say this? A Negan and Daryl spinoff makes way more sense. Way more sense in terms of these two dudes who were like rough and rugged and going off on motorcycles. Like that's their thing. Why is Maggie gonna go off and leave her son again after everything that's happened, after just barely getting him back? Why would she risk her son? There might be a good reason coming down the pipe for that, but as of right now, we have no reason at all to believe that these two people would go off to New York City, a very dangerous place to try to get to. How many hundreds of miles are they away from New York City that they're going to go there? It's not vibing. But everything is finally made right. All is right with the world. Maggie has opportunity to kill Pamela. She doesn't take the shot because of everything, all the conversations that have been had about, we're not the enemy, da 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 da. She does not shoot Pamela, and then Pamela goes to the gate and attempts to kill herself via Zombie Lance, and Maggie shoots Zombie Lance. Why is Pamela alive? I don't know. Even with the messaging, we're not the Walking Dead. Let her die. Let her get clawed to death. Let her sacrifice herself for all of the wrong and the evil and the ills that she has done. There's no reason to keep her character alive other than the fact that there are thousands of people in the Commonwealth that apparently don't know what's going on, and maybe they will need to hear from her that she's going to step down. But again, none of it makes any sense. Everything is finally brought right with the world, and then we get kind of like a next day, and the whole crew is sitting in Alexandria eating. And I like this scene. It's a nice homage to season 7, episode 1 at the end after Glenn and Abraham have died. And we have that like vision scene of if they had lived, if Sasha had gotten pregnant with Abraham's kid, if baby Herschel had grown up and was sitting on Glenn's lap, all of those different things. So it was a beautiful moment. And then we find out, like for real, that Rosita has gotten bit by a zombie and that she is going to succumb. She gets to have her final moments in a beautiful bedroom with baby Coco laying there asleep by her side. Then everybody walks in and says goodbye. Gabriel, who seems stronger in his faith than ever, right, prays over her. And then she and Eugene, who they were together at the beginning of their journey, get to say their last goodbyes. It was a beautiful moment. I'm not going to nitpick it. It was a bit unbelievable for the beauty of it all, but it was a great moment. A great moment to have. And then she dies. And then we get a time jump of 1 year later. Eugene is at her memorial in the Commonwealth with her name there. And we see him and the missus, and they've had a little baby, and her name is Rosie, so named after Rosita. Beautiful, beautiful pay it forward moment. Gabriel is there with baby Coco. Best of all, to me, one of the best moments of the night is Ezekiel becoming the governor of the Commonwealth. And I think that that was one moment of the show for how I felt like the episode lacked in killing and death for a show that started out so horrific and so horror filled. That was a really well paid off moment because we've really seen Ezekiel all throughout the season like grow to care about the Commonwealth. We've seen him care for those animals there, get back into his niche, and he was probably the best leader on the show, hands down. Like with the exception of the stuff that Negan pulled and him kind of getting tangled up in Rick's mess, Ezekiel was the best leader. His compound, his community probably ran better than anyone's. So I'm really happy to see Ezekiel make it as governor and Mercer as lieutenant governor. One of the best moments of the night is Princess clapping it up for her man. Like that's her baby. Hey, babe. That's her baby. And so the support of him. All right. So a couple of questions that we had in the comments. Don't forget to jump down into the comments and answer these questions. First of all, what did you think of the series finale? Who was your saddest show death overall, and who was your all-around favorite character? Like I said, overall, this series finale did feel like an ending. So I will applaud them that. It felt like the end of a show. I've seen some series finales that don't feel like the end of the show, and it felt like there could have been more, and it felt like an end for the most part. It didn't feel like I needed to see anything else. Like the idea is that potentially they are secure in this community that they've built with now really good leadership and people who've learned from the mistakes of the past. And so having an Ezekiel and a Mercer working together to uplift this community, and I believing that they will do a really good job. I believe that wholeheartedly. So in that regard, that part of the show felt true, felt good to me. And it certainly, I think, compared to some of my big series finale moments that I've had, This Is Us, Game of Thrones, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dawson's Creek, it's pretty high up there. It didn't make me cry in the way that This Is Us and Dawson's Creek series finales did, but it did not make me angry in the way that Game of Thrones did. So in that regard, it was a decent series finale. Now, another question for the night. Are you planning to watch Dead City, Daryl Dixon, and Rick and Michonne? Let me know in the comments. Like I said before, because I started the channel so far after the show had been airing, I didn't really want to become like, I didn't want to seem like I was jumping on the bandwagon of talking about the Walking Dead, even though I had been a fan of the show since day one. But there were so many seasons to try to cover that I just was like, I don't feel like I can do it justice. But if enough people watch this video and respond in the comments saying that they plan to watch Dead City, Daryl Dixon, and Rick and Michonne, I will consider doing either recap and reviews or lives to break down, especially the Rick and Michonne series. I know hands down I'm going to watch that. Denai Guerrero is one of my favorite actresses, so I'm definitely going to watch that. I'm going to turn on episode 1 at least of Daryl Dixon, but if you guys want me to watch Daryl Dixon, I will watch Daryl Dixon. I love Norman Reedus, so it won't be hard for me to watch that show. I just don't know how excited I am with the premise, and I just have to see where they're going with this, because the idea is that he's going to be in France, and The Walking Dead has done such a poor job of exploring other areas of the world, or talking about, like, or having any kind of like passing of information between all of that, that makes it really hard for me to believe that Daryl Dixon is somehow making his way over to France. So in that regard, I don't know how well I believe that. And again, to me, I know that the Walking Dead crew, they love Lauren Cohan. So I understand wanting to give her and the character of Maggie more airtime, especially because I think she felt as well that she was done dirty in season 8, as she should. But a Negan and Daryl team up seems so much better to me and so much more interesting. And I definitely would have watched that. But I will definitely check all of them out. But I will hardcore go in for the Rick and Michonne kind of tie up. I think it's only supposed to be 6 episodes, so we'll see. So let me know in the comments if you plan on watching any of those, and if you do, if you would love to do some lives, we can schedule some live times. And then finally, kind of like last thoughts I have. You see my notes here, guys. I took so many notes. Took so many notes. So I just want to go over this list that I made really quickly before we wrap things up with this live. The main core group. So The Walking Dead has been all about these main core members. And when we have character deaths, usually the characters have been around long enough for us to feel an affinity for them and for them to be big, shocking moments for the most part. And so this is who we have left as of the making of this show, with a couple of asterisks beside some names. So we have Rick, asterisk beside his name. We've got Daryl and Carol from season 1, Maggie from season 2, Michonne, who technically entered in season 3, Eugene and Rosita, asterisk beside Rosita because she R.I.P. to Rosita in this episode, season 4, Gabriel in season 5. We got an asterisk beside Morgan, who was episode 1, season 1. Then we got him in the Clear episode in season 5. He came back. Aaron in season 5, still around, still kicking. Negan in season 6. Ezekiel and Jerry in season 7. Yumiko, Connie, and Kelly and Luke in season 9, but RIP to Luke in this episode. RIP to Jules, but I don't remember when Jules came in, like when we actually saw Jules. I know she's from Oceanside, but I don't remember when the first time we saw Jules was. So let me know in the comments if you remember when Jules came in. Princess, season 10, 9, 10-ish, and then Mercer in season 10-ish and 11. So those are our main core group people, kind of sort of who kind of become like, feel like the family of The Walking Dead. And so let's talk about the deaths for the night. Again, we have Rosita, Jules, and Luke. A little bit of an emotional attachment for Luke. He's a death that you can give to that outlier group that's still a part of the main group, and so trying to get some emotional value there. Definitely, I think the big emotional death of the night was Rosita. Her death was fitting, although very sad, because she sacrificed herself essentially to save her daughter. But they also kind of did the fake out thing and then actually led into it and did kind of like the hidden bite trope that's become kind of like famous for The Walking Dead. And I think it was nice giving her a beautiful send off. And it was sad and touching, but I guess I feel as though the way that this show has been the last season, it's felt like the characters were so distant from each other that, and then because, with the exception of like Eugene, there's not a big like romantic relationship for Rosita. Usually there's a big romantic relationship when a character dies that we can go kind of feel vicariously through the person with the familial attachment or the romantic attachment. It didn't feel like we got that really with Gabriel or with Eugene through Rosita. And so I kind of feel like they would have been better off giving, or at least including in there, a character's death like a Mercer princess kind of situation. Still would have been a little wonky because they were so late added into the show. Maybe even a big name character like Aaron. I love Ross Marquand, but I can't imagine it's cheap him wearing that prosthesis all the time. So they definitely could have went ahead and killed him off or had him sacrifice himself to save Lydia, and that would have been very touching. So I mean, it wasn't really a lot of death for a show that's been known for a lot of death. It wasn't really a lot of death, not as shocking, not nearly as shocking as some of the other deaths that we've seen. And so yeah, just I guess my lasting notes, the big surprise, but not really a surprise, was at the end of the show, Daryl is leaving. We don't know that Negan is leaving yet, or Maggie, so they're going to have to do something to explain like why they're out in the world and not in the safety of their home. But then we get the voiceover with Michonne and Rick writing these letters. It seems like at first they're writing them together, but then we found out they're writing them separately. And they're talking about the people who they carry in their hearts that they've lost. And this echoes in a beautiful montage where we see a montage of the people who've come before. I really appreciate this moment, but I will say this. I guess my one gripe with this show for this episode is when we saw Eugene at the wall with Rosita's name, it would have been nice, especially in like either Ezekiel's speech or somewhere in the Commonwealth showing that something visible, where we would have seen Rick, Michonne, because nobody really 100% knows that they're alive yet. Rick, Michonne, Carol, like all the people who've come before, all people who got our core people to these groups, like their monument. We did momentarily see, of course, Maggie and baby Herschel at Glenn's grave, and then, of course, Eugene at Rosita's grave. But I just kept feeling like, where was Rick's legacy in The Walking Dead? I guess his legacy technically is RJ and Judith. But where was the monument to them, to Rick, Michonne, to everyone who came before? Where was something, a piece of artwork, a painting, something like a what's the thing called that you put on the wall? Like a big painting on the wall or something that shows everybody who came before in this show. The voiceover work was good, but I just felt like for this show to be ending, knowing that those people who helped make everyone who they were, made the communities what they were, brought these people together, really were leaders in the community, that there would be something there visibly so that no one forgets their legacy. And then you can have Judith and RJ there on the day that Uncle Ezekiel is becoming the governor and going and visiting this mural and leaving something there for their parents. That would have been nice. And so, like I said, we see Daryl, Maggie, and Negan are leaving. So where's the homage to everyone who was like core to the Walking Dead? Because let's face it, the Commonwealth was only in the last 2 seasons. They weren't core to the Walking Dead. So that was the only thing that I think, if I was like a showrunner and I had maybe 5 more minutes that didn't belong to marketing of other projects or advertisements, I would have included something like that in the show. That being said, it was a nice send-off for a show that has had a lot of ups and downs, especially in the last 4 years. My personal favorite season, people disagree with this, but I actually really enjoyed season 4. Even with the standalone episodes, which people didn't like, I really enjoyed those for the character development and the character building. Plus, we get that roughneck, rugged moment where Rick bites the snot out of the head claimer. I love that. One of my favorite Walking Dead moments. And I feel like that's the group that I felt like we spent the most time with, and I felt like was really connected and joined. Because let's face it, nobody liked Lori. We liked Shane as a character, but we're okay with Shane. Like, we had a lot of death at the beginning, but we hadn't had a chance to get really attached to those characters, I think, with the exception of like Dale. And so season 4 was like when we still had our core nucleus of people, and they had, they were on their way to try to find Beth, and they had Hope and Verver, and that's my favorite of probably all of the seasons. And then of course, after Negan, 86's Glenn and Abraham, things kind of fell apart because I think they I don't think anyone could anticipate how taking something that was so literally in the comic book would not translate into real life, because even when you put it on TV, even though it is fantasy, we're playing with the real life rules, and having someone kill one of your most beloved characters in the real world, can there truly be a redemption arc without them paying an ultimate sacrifice? I think you can make the decision to say that no one's going to take it from them, but if they're going to be redeemed, do they have to offer it? I think that's a really good question that this show is going to still have to contend with in order to have a truly successful Negan and Maggie spinoff. Because I think even though the moment that they had in last night's episode was really well done, I think that they're going to have to contend with that in order to make that particular series work. I think that the Michonne and the Rick one will work no matter what. Denai has been she's a part of the MCU. A lot of the characters on this show are a part of the MCU, but she's a part of essentially the biggest MCU project with Black Panther. And she is just a phenomenal character. And of course, Angelique and Rick Grimes, great all around. So I think that show is going to pull some good numbers. I have my doubts about the Negan and the Maggie one. And Daryl has those hardcore fans, like, we kill Daryl, we riot. They're going to jump on board for anything. I don't think the numbers will be there just yet. It's going to have to be really good, but we'll see. I will say that I think what one of the shows needs to do is return back to the horror roots, because with the Walking Dead hasn't felt like a horror show in a really long time, and I think that was when it was at its highest. So those are all of my final thoughts, my memories, my favorite moments of The Walking Dead. I wish I had a really nice in memoriam here to play for all of the characters that we've lost along the way. If this was not my computer, I'd pour one out for everyone we lost along the way. But those are my thoughts, my retrospective. Please hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you guys thought about the show. Thank you for joining my live so much. And until next time, guys, toodles.